This is part 6 of my 2020 Beginner's Guide to Growing Tomatoes series, and in this episode I'm going to give you 5 ways to preserve your garden tomatoes without canning. Welcome back to Growing Frugal, or if it's your first time here, I'm Susan, and on this channel we're all about learning how to live a lower cost life while still eating healthily and sustainably, and we do that by learning how to grow food, how to cook creatively with that food, and how to find simple ways to save money. And what a season it's been here for tomatoes. It has been amazing. I started off my seeds really early this year to get this series on the go because I wanted it to be live, but it's been really nerve-wracking to start them so early. And then of course we've had all the problems of 2020 that you know about, and on top of that we've had real droughts here, massive windstorms. It's been a really tricky year. So well done the tomatoes, because I've had a bumper crop and I'm now well into my preserving season. The plants are coming to the end of their fruiting, I think, soon, but they've been keeping me going and keeping me busy in the kitchen finding different ways of preserving. So today I've got these 5 simple ideas for you for preserving those tomatoes that don't involve canning, and what I'm going to do is go through them in order of the time it takes. So they're all simple, but some of them are super quick when you're really in a hurry, but you must preserve those lovely tomatoes. And then as you go through, each tip takes a little bit longer in time, but actually they're all super simple. So I hope you find them useful. Please subscribe if you're enjoying this series. The final episode in the series is going to be about saving seeds. So how do we save our own tomato seeds ready for next year from our very own crop? And it's my first time doing this. I've already started the process, so I should have something to show you hopefully by next Friday. So let's get into it and let's give you these 5 tips. So tip number 1 is for those times when you've got lots of tomatoes to pick, but you've got absolutely no time to be preserving them in any way. So did you know that you can actually just take those tomatoes, wash them, get them into a bag, take out the air if you can, and put them straight into the freezer whole. Now be warned that this is not the best way to freeze them, because as you freeze them the walls of the tomatoes will break down, and that means if you just defrosted them, you can't just kind of slice them and put them on a salad. They're very much for throwing into sauces or bolognese or curries, because they will go a little bit mushy as they defrost. So they're perfectly edible, they're not degraded or anything. It's just the process of freezing kind of breaks down the cell walls so they become softer as they defrost. But it's a brilliant thing to know about for those days when you just need to save the tomatoes. Tip number 2 is to make a very simple tray-baked pizza sauce, and this one takes about 30 minutes. So to do that, all you're doing is roasting up the tomatoes in the oven or in the air fryer, and roasting them up with some onions, some garlic, some herbs, some stuff that you like. Get them all nice and browned, and then blend them down and get them into the freezer in convenient portion sizes, ready for when you next want to make a pizza. And then all you have to do is get the pizza sauce out in the morning. It'll easily be defrosted in time for your evening meal. And I've already got a video on how to make pizza sauce in this way, so if you're not sure how to do it, go on over to that video. It's a great recipe. So the third way of preserving your tomatoes is to make a big batch of marinara sauce. So marinara sauce is a tomato-based sauce, and I put lots of veggies in this, including some courgettes from the garden. I've used shallots this year that I've grown, lots of garlic that I've grown, and whatever herbs you like. I like herbs de Provence actually in this. And a marinara sauce is sort of like a spaghetti sauce, but it's so flexible, so you can use it in in curries, you can use it with pasta, you can use it to make chicken marinara with melted mozzarella on top. It's a really flexible sauce. So where I have the time, this is where I put most of my efforts in terms of preserving the tomatoes. Because if I put in the work now, I know I've got lots of really quick meals that I can make in the week throughout winter. And I have made loads this year. I haven't counted up yet, but it's a lot. So if you've got an electric pressure cooker like an Instant Pot, this one can be done in an hour, and that is a huge time saving on the normal way of making marinara sauce. So whichever way you do it, marinara sauce is my recommendation for the best way of storing tomatoes, to keep it frugal so you've got the base of so many meals, and to save yourself time and give your future self a huge favour so that you've got lots in the freezer in the busy times as the months to come, because the challenges just keep coming at the moment. So if you haven't made marinara sauce in the Instant Pot before, have a look at my video that I made again last year on this that gives you the method. I've had some great feedback on this sauce, and what this recipe does is give you a bonus, because all of that tomato juice that stays in the pressure cooker can then be used as a beautiful stock for soups. My favourite is definitely minestrone with this. So have a look at that and get that marinara sauce going and into the freezer. It's a fantastic way to preserve your tomatoes. So the fourth way to preserve tomatoes is to dehydrate them. And to do this, it's going to take you anywhere between 8 hours and maybe up to 15 hours in the dehydrator, depending on the size of the tomatoes and what type they are. So this year I've dehydrated a variety of tomatoes, and for the larger and juicier tomatoes, I've dehydrated those for about 8 hours. So these are partially dehydrated, more sun-dried style tomatoes, and they will store really well in the freezer, and they're a bit of a space saver because they reduce so much in size as you dehydrate them, but the flavour really intensifies, so they're delicious. And then for the tomatoes where I fully dehydrate them and there's no liquid left and no stickiness, they're really very, very dry, I just put those into a jar. For the first few days I'll give them a shake each day and watch out for any condensation. So if you see condensation forming on the jar after you've dehydrated food, that shows you that there hasn't been fully dehydrated. So if they're like that, I'll either pop them back into the dehydrator, or if there's not many of them, because I just do a small batch of these, I'll just put them in the fridge and they'll be fine for a few weeks. Just keep an eye on them and watch out for any signs of mould and throw them away if any of that happens. So dehydrated tomatoes are another way of storing and preserving tomatoes, and if your freezer fails, which mine did last year and it still hurts, you've still got some of that tomato crop because these are in the cupboard or the fridge. And then the final way to preserve tomatoes is make a tomato powder. So if your freezer is absolutely bursting, as mine is now, if your cupboards are bursting, as mine are now, you may need to space save. And this is the biggest space saver of all, of course, because it's so small when it's powdered down. And you can use that to add a real tomato burst to anything you're making. You just take a teaspoon and put it into your soups or your stews or your curries or anything where you want to get that real hit of deep tomato taste. And what this is especially useful for is if you've got lots of very watery kind of tomatoes or very juicy cherry tomatoes and they're just really too juicy or too large to be dehydrating practically. They might need 3 days or more. So when you've got a batch of tomatoes like that, all I do is blend them so that they're completely blended down. I leave the skins on, my blender can handle that, there's no bits of skin there. A lot of nutrients are in skins of fruits and vegetables, so I like to keep the skin if I can. So I blend it all down so it's a puree, and then I pour it onto the dehydrator on a mat, so that otherwise it would just fall through the gaps in the trays. So pour it onto the mat and then dehydrate it until it has become like a leather, and then when it's completely dry you can just peel it off the backing paper, break it up and put it into the coffee grinder or the blender, get it into a powder, and there, from huge amounts of tomatoes, you end up with a very small amount of super intensive tomatoes. So I've actually seen chefs using this in a really kind of creative way. So if you've got ideas for how you use tomato powder, please let me know in the comments, because this is my first time this year. And just an extra tip, when it comes to storing dehydrated foods, including tomatoes, in cupboards where they're shelf stable, the best way of keeping them good for a long time is to exclude light, so to keep them as dark as possible and to exclude as much air as possible. So I don't want to use vac packing because I'm going to be in and out of this tomato stuff. So what I'm using is this little stainless steel pot with a silicone lid, and the stainless steel is going to exclude all of the light, keep the powder really nice and fresh. And then as I can put on the silicone lid, I can push down with my thumb, and that creates like an indent which is pushing out the air, and then seal it up. So a really convenient way actually of taking out some of the air. It's not as efficient as vac packing, but for something where you're going in and out and you're going to be taking a teaspoon and closing it back up again, it's a good way of doing things. So I hope those tips are useful for you and give you some ideas. If you have other ways that you preserve tomatoes, please let me know in the comments. And if you like this video, give it a thumbs up to let me know. That really helps me keep going. And I'll be back next time with more cooking and growing tips. See you then.